All right, well, welcome to the second class. So happy to be here with all of you. We're still planting the seeds for our EcoDharma practice and hopefully for a cultural shift when it comes to EcoDharma in particular and environmentalist issues in general. And last time we talked about the personal plane of EcoDharma in a way in which we contemplate the threads of our own contemplative practice, putting that against the background of the natural world, the rest of the natural world, we could say, seeing how we could contribute positively to that, but also receive some sustenance and some nourishment, psychological or spiritual, from that. And one of the practices that we started exploring was the practice of settling uh, our body, speech, and mind, or the practice of the three pills, as Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche describes it. It's a practice that's present in multiple traditions. It's present in the tradition of Padmasambhava. It's present in the tradition of burn masters, and there are more versions of it, I'm sure, scattered across or sprinkled across the Indo-Tibetan tradition. What's important, though, is for us to find one way of doing this practice that's suitable for us personally, and to use that, indeed, to actually soothe our body, speech, and mind. So we'll start with that, combining that with the other practice that we have discussed, the practice of connecting to the three lineages. And then we'll continue exploring the personal level of EcoDharma, and then we'll look at the communal level, which is kind of our main topic to play with today. So let's find a comfortable stationary position, just making sure we're uh, actually feeling okay in our body, at least when it comes to our position. Of course, there are always some aches and pains here and there, but it is it is definitely possible to choose a comfortable position right now. So let's do that. Let's play with the different parts of the body for a little while, adjusting them as necessary. Eventually arriving at a position that is both settled, still, and comfortable. So there's already an element of stillness in the body. And to deepen that, as a preliminary, we can perform an abbreviated body scan, starting with our crown, exploring the sensations in our face, releasing the muscle tension there to the degree that's available to us right now. Exploring the sensations in our shoulders, our chest and upper back, the abdominal area, then our pelvic floor, our legs, and finally our feet. allowing our body to continue resting, releasing more and more tension with each new exhalation. And on the level of our mind, for a little while, reconnecting to our highest aspirations for this course in general, for this practice in particular, revisiting our highest vision of what it is that we would like to accomplish eventually in the long run. Orienting this session towards the fulfillment of that goal, the realization of that goal. And then, to be able to progress towards that goal more efficiently, also inviting the inspiration to flow into our heart from the three lineages that we are naturally connected to. The lineage of the land that we're currently on, the spiritual lineage that we might have a personal connection to, or multiple spiritual lineages, and our ancestral lineage, the one that created our body. May we feel inspired by everything that's positive and good in these three lineages, so that the qualities of our ancestors flow into our heart, inspire it, and make us stronger and wiser and kinder. And with that, moving on to the practice of the three pills, where we first rest in the experience of stillness. The stillness that's present throughout our body. Being in stillness and being aware of the stillness. The stillness that lies underneath all types of movement. For some of us, it might be easier to notice that stillness in our hands or in our feet or somewhere else in the body. And then eventually we start noticing it all across the body, always present there. Equally, connecting to the quality of silence, the silence that lies at the root of all sounds and all expressions of our speech. And that includes both the inactivity of our own speech right now and the silence at the root of all sounds. Listening to the silence with our entire being and releasing with each new outbreath all acts of inner speech that still come up. If at any point we notice our inner dialogue happening again, we can just release that with the outbreath, once again listening to the deeper silence within. Finally, for spaciousness, connecting to the spacious awareness underneath all of our thoughts and other types of mental activity. That might mean that we're focused on the background spaciousness underneath all of our thoughts, mental images, memories, and so forth. Instead of looking at the furniture in the room of our mind, we're looking at the space that's holding everything. And we're releasing our grasping with each new out breath, with each new exhalation. And finally, while resting in this union of stillness, silence, and spaciousness, recognizing that we're surrounded by the five natural elements in different configurations. And while resting in the three pills, or the three qualities, allowing ourselves to also be inspired and nourished by the energy of the five elements and their interconnected dance. Then, briefly dedicating the energy of this practice to our highest aspirations, the ones with which we began. May it contribute to the fulfillment of those goals. And then slowly reintroducing some movement to our body by moving our fingers, rocking back and forth a little bit, stretching, and slowly concluding our practice as we come back to our physical space and then to our shared online space as well. Thank you. So we'll go back to our slides for a little while, starting where we finished last time. And just as a kind of general reminder, there's no one correct way to study EcoDharma or to explore EcoDharma. There are probably a million doors to it. And we could really begin with any Dharma-related principle, I think, or environment-related principle, and weave the whole tapestry or kind of uncover the whole tapestry step by progressing from that point. However, in this case, for this specific course that we're doing, I thought it would be helpful, based on my own experience and what I've heard from other people, it would be helpful to explore some of the traditional lists related to the Buddhist Dharma knowing that they actually fully apply to our relationship with the rest of the natural world as well. So it is both an exploration of the Buddhist Dharma and an exploration of eco-Dharma. Those are two things that are very close to each other, overlapping largely. And for some people, the entirety of their Buddhist practice is pervaded by eco-Dharma, and by contrast, their eco-Dharma is pervaded by their Buddhist practice. But of course, there are also other ways of doing that. It is possible to be a practitioner of eco-Dharma, but mainly from the point of view of another great spiritual or philosophical tradition. Totally possible, as long as I think we adhere to the foundational principles of respect towards the natural world, combined with a wish to make sure it would still be there in terms of the part of the natural world that's alive, that it would still be there by the time we're gone. And that's kind of where our effort is mainly directed to. Anyhow, so we started with this idea of allowing the qualities of the natural world to soothe us on a personal level. So we're exploring our personal level and kind of the context of our life and the contents of our mind. We're playing with it. And that's a large part of what the Buddha's Dharma is all about, exploring our mind and taking the responsibility for it, and then doing something with what's present in our mind. And it's within that field that some of my teachers would always use the analogy of botany. Um, our mind is like a garden, and depending on what we grow in that garden, we would eventually get certain results. So if we nourish the plans within our mind that are wholesome and positive and lead to and can be used for something good, then we would get a good harvest of happiness. Whereas if we allow our inner garden to be fully taken over by, let's say, invasive species that um, kind of suffocate the good stuff, then the results that we would eventually receive would not be so good. So we have this natural analogy, and we do what we want with it in that we can actually make some practical decisions with what we do with our mind in order to get eventually greater levels of happiness. The problem there, of course, is that in order to make those practical decisions and get those good results, we do need to do some study with regards to the properties of these different plants and kind of a balanced way of combining them, not giving priority to just one thing at the exclusion of all the other good things, and making sure that the entire system is functioning properly and is balanced, that there are multiple types of connection present there that sustain and nourish the whole thing. So that's kind of where we're starting. I like this analogy a lot, and obviously it already carries these eco-dharma um, ideas in it. And at this level, something that we did discuss last time was this idea that everything we're doing in the domain of the Dharma in general, and this can be applied to all the different types of the Dharma. Everything that we're doing in this dharmic domain has to do with establishing well-being. Because once again, one of the definitions of Dharma in general is that it's a way of being or a way of living that brings us to an experience of profound and long-lasting well-being or happiness. The other interpretation, which is equally true, is that the Dharma, any kind of genuine Dharma, is something that holds us back from suffering, prevents us from suffering. I think Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to give this analogy of someone grabbing us as we're about to fall off a cliff. We're about to fall from a cliff, but someone grabs us and pulls us back. And that's what the Dharma, generally speaking, is supposed to do. Well, the eco-Dharma is supposed to do that for us, especially with regards to our relationship with the rest of the natural world. But when it comes to establishing well-being, once again, this is the general on the slide, the general definition of happiness, the umbrella definition of happiness in Buddhism. Happiness is a state that we want to extend when it is experienced or to evoke when it is not currently present. And then we can talk about different planes of happiness, different levels of happiness and well-being. And we can talk about the two primary types that are especially important if we are to kind of arrive at greater sustainable well-being. So with regards to the three planes, and this is something that we're covering together in these three meetings, there are the planes of the personal level, and that's where we are trying to figure out whether we are feeling happy and whether there is a way for us to feel happier in this life. And that's a completely natural wish. And that is the reason that kind of, or the motivation that brings many people to the Dharma in general, just wanting to be happy personally. I want to feel better. And eventually, maybe I even want to feel great. I want to feel wonderful. I want to feel that my life has meaning and that there's a lot of joy present in it in every moment. So that's the personal level. Then we have the communal level, and this is where we're looking at our communities, different types of communities, our temporary, intentional communities like the one we are creating right now by just being with each other and discussing these ideas, but also our more stable communities, such as our professional communities, our familial communities, our local communities, etc. And such entities as countries, regions, cities, towns, villages, and so forth. These are also all communities. A country is a community. It's a very large community, but it is a community that has a certain number of members to it. That's the population of a given country, and it has certain structures built into it. And those can be more or less effective when it comes to establishing the communal well-being for all who live on the land of a specific country. And yet it's a community, and like any community, it is ideally contributing to everyone's well-being so that everyone feels a certain level of happiness. And once again, that is something that can be measured. This is why we have studies in the subjective levels of happiness when it comes to this country or that country. And of course, there's lots to be added to any of those studies. There's lots to be said about maybe the quality of life in any given country or within any specific community, and the kind of the difference between those who have the most kind of money and affluence within a specific society and those who have the least. But nonetheless, overall, there's a certain level of well-being that's kind of common to all who are present within a specific community. And ideally, we could be working towards increasing that. That's a possibility. And then there's the global level, which is just something that relates to everyone who lives on the globe. That's kind of the connotation there. So this planet and every being on it, not just humans, but also all the other types of beings collectively. How are we experiencing our current levels of happiness and suffering? Are we all collectively more happy than we are unhappy, or are we all kind of miserable right now and far from happiness on average? So, and how can we contribute to a more pervasive type of well-being for all who live? So the progression in our course right now is from the personal to the communal and then to the global, but we could equally move in the opposite direction, or we could just jump between the three levels. As long as we're tending to all three of them, I think something good is happening. If we ignore, uh, let's say, 2 out of 3 and only focus on one, that's where the problems start in large ways, because obviously just focusing on the personal at the exclusion of communal or global, well, that's not very sustainable, at least for others, and probably not for ourselves either, because at least in the Mahayana Buddhist theory of happiness, genuine well-being, profound well-being is unattainable unless we open our heart to others and we hold others in the spirit of appreciation and cherishing and care. So whether that's true or not is something for us to explore personally, and that's where the Mahayana Buddhist tradition is offering us a lot of tools that we can play with in order to understand whether this theory is correct. But in general, that's kind of the ethical push overall. If you want to be personally happy, you have to include others in the equation. But then, uh, could we succeed if we just focus on one of the remaining ones, let's say, at the exclusion of the other two? Could we focus on the communal at the exclusion of personal and global? Well, not so much. History teaches us that countries that were fully focused on their own well-being, but ignored the well-being of individual citizens and also ignored the global well-being, endangering it in some ways, were not able to deliver a genuine type of well-being for everyone. Once again, well, because the individual was ignored and the global level was also was ignored. The individual was ignored and the global level was ignored. So both were ignored, not so good. And then could we just focus on the global, not focusing on the personal or the communal at all? Well, for a little while we could. We could really passionately care about important issues, but then after a while we would get burnt out because we were ignoring the needs of our body and mind, and also maybe not taking care of the communities that we're collaborating with. And it is those communities that bring about meaningful change. So exclusion doesn't really work here. We need to constantly keep our eye on one of these three levels. And this is actually a practice. This is related to a practice that I very much like, which is not a meditation practice per se, but just practice that helps me with maintaining inner balance when I get a bit frustrated with what's going on in the world or with what's going on a personal level, let's say. And this is the practice that I like to refer to as the three lenses or the three planes, where there's the plane of personal well-being that I can consider, and that's my personal well-being. Then there's the communal level, which includes the economy, culture, and other things that have to do with our communal interdependence. And then there's the global level, which primarily for me relates to the ecological. So we, in some ways, could refer to these three planes as the personal, the economical, and the ecological. And these kind of have different timelines to them. My personal well-being has the shortest timeline to it because even if I live, let's say, for, well, I'm 36 right now, let's say for 60 more years, which is a stretch actually, but if I do, and pass away at the very senior age of 96, still that's not that much compared to the communal level at which countries exists for centuries before transforming into something else. Communities, towns, cities, villages once again exist for centuries before dissolving or transforming into something else or merging together. And so that timeline is much longer. But even the timeline that is even longer than that is the ecological timeline, where we're thinking in terms of, yes, centuries and thousands of years, and actually hundreds of thousands of years. Yes, right now we're very much focused on dealing with issues that are very immediate, in that unless we take this much action by this date, these things would happen. This is where we are right now. But we're only at this juncture because these issues were previously ignored. So for that reason, generally this global ecological level has a very, very vast timeline to it. It's just right now we're at this unique position in history where it kind of seems very, very urgent. And rightly so, but if we are able to somehow fix it, then we will go back to hopefully this level where the ecological is very vast. And by shifting between the three levels, when we get kind of upset with one of the three, we can gain perspective and feel more settled and more comfortable maybe with what's happening. So let's say we're looking at the political news, the social news, let's say. Maybe we're not really happy with what's happening in our country right now or our city. Some decisions made by, let's say, our town council are not really making us joyful at all. Actually, they're giving us a lot of frustration. And yes, it is absolutely valid to feel frustrated sometimes and to seek to try to find ways to act on it. How can I contribute positively to this communal dynamic? But then, if we exclusively focus on that for a long time, we might get burnt out. So, focusing for short periods of time also on our personal well being, focusing for short periods of intense contemplation also on the global level, and then constantly moving between the three to never let one of them fully occupy our attention to the degree where it becomes damaging. That's a practice I personally find helpful when I see that one of the three levels is making me frustrated. So just yesterday, I was thinking about cultural processes related to environmentalism and how many of the people I know are completely ignoring that dimension, let's say, but are presenting themselves as these ambassadors of things that are good and true, um, bringing and sharing wonderful skills or ideas with others. But somehow all those ideas are mainly centered on AI related stuff. And seemingly nothing has to do with, let's say, the environment or the preservation of their environment or the natural world and or social justice for that matter. So that got me a bit kind of upset or let's say unsettled. It gave me this feeling of sadness, amongst other things, existential sadness about the state of the world that we're living in and how people might believe that they're doing something good, but there's this huge uh, area that they're ignoring while doing that because that area is seemingly not profitable as opposed to AI. And then stepping back from that and focusing on something that's something that I can work with right now. That was really helpful for me. So stepping back from this communal level and looking at the larger level, the global level, or stepping back and looking at the personal level, these are both valid solutions for how to feel a bit more settled and a bit more resourced to continue dealing with it all. And actually, when it comes to the global level, yes, one aspect of it is the environmental dimension. And then the other aspect that we could add, if we want to, if that kind of accords with our personal beliefs, one more level to it is the global spiritual dimension, we could say, because for some people, their beliefs include a level of reality that is seen as transcendental, that transcends even what's happening to this planet right here, right now. So if our personal beliefs related to a system of knowledge or multiple systems of knowledge include that level, that then that's another level that's helpful to look at on occasion, just to gain that perspective. Because otherwise, once again, we might feel suffocated, even when thinking of the level of this planet alone. So that's another thing. And then the other distinction to explore is the distinction between the hedonic and eudaimonic aspects of happiness. And there's this something that many of you, if not all of you, would already be very familiar with. But let's just go through it once again, because I find that every time we discuss this and every time we contemplate it, it actually helps us strengthen our resolve with regards to the cultivation of eudaimonic well-being while not ignoring hedonic well-being. That one is all obviously very important as well. So just to revisit this distinction before we go on, the hedonic type of happiness, the hedonic happiness has to do with every type of well-being, joy, pleasure, happiness, and so forth that we experience through being stimulated by something on the outside. So hedonic happiness is received from the outside, or it is experienced due to something happening to us on the outer level. If I like my, let's say, beverage by taking a sip of it and receiving a moment of pleasure and joy, I am experiencing hedonic happiness. If I like receiving positive reinforcement in the form of, let's say, appreciative words, if I like to know that I have a good reputation, if I like knowing that I have a certain amount of money saved in the bank, and so forth, all of these things are the different dimensions of hedonic happiness. And the Buddhist tradition actually highlights four of those as our primary objects of grasping. We have pleasure that comes from sensory stimulation, so the pleasurable experiences of sight and sound and so forth. We have pleasure that comes from owning stuff and having belongings, let's say, related to money or property or all of those sorts of things, gadgets that we own, I don't know, semi-precious stones, collections, all of that. Then we have pleasure that comes from hearing pleasant words, when others praise us, thank us, and just say nice stuff to us. And that extends also to the social media domain, where people can be liking our pictures and, I don't know, reposting them and so forth. And then finally, we have this vague but very important idea of having a reputation. And that is seen sometimes as actually the most subtle object of grasping, because if we think, oh, these people probably respect me, we can never be truly sure, but as a guess, we can think, well, they probably do respect me, because based on their reactions to me and what they say and the opinions they exchange among themselves, it does seem like there's a certain level of respect there. That can bring us a lot of joy, knowing that or recognizing that. Whereas if we think that others have a bad opinion of us, that they probably think we're stupid or unqualified or incompetent or a really bad person, that can actually get to us quite strongly. And of course, we all have different priorities when it comes to these four, and this list of four is not exhaustive, but these four are described as the four main objects of grasping from our side when it comes to hedonic happiness. Another way to describe it is to say that hedonic happiness comes from what we get from the outside world, from the outside, from what we bring into ourselves, kind of consuming stuff. And obviously, this also includes food, shelter, clothing, having access to education, having access to human company and non-human company as well. So, and all of those things are very important to the degree where we could say a truly civilized society would be providing access to these things to all of its members. Everyone would be fed. Everyone would have clothes to wear. Everyone would have shelter to protect them from the elements and so forth. So obviously these things are important. So hedonic happiness is in no way bad or unimportant or non-spiritual, all of those kind of labels that we might have by ignore or all those reasons we might have for ignoring hedonic happiness. Well, they we need to think carefully about them, because sometimes when we say, oh, all of those things don't matter, it might come from a position of privilege, not recognizing the fact that we're saying that, but we are personally actually not hungry. So it is a bit insensitive to say that others should just forget about their hunger as well. So there is a valid reason for paying close attention to hedonic happiness. And because the lamentable situation that we're finding ourselves in terms of the environment, has to do with hedonic production and consumption, we do need to think about establishing sustainable systems of hedonic distribution and sustainable systems of experiencing and finding and creating hedonic happiness for ourselves and for each other. That's very important. And that's what a large chunk of environmentalism is focused on. So when you read about the environmentalist or environmentalism inspired economic models, production models, political models, and so forth, a lot of it would be focused on hedonic happiness. And that's totally valid. But then the kind of the working hypothesis of EcoDharma, in a way, is that we cannot solve hedonic problems by hedonic solutions alone. We also need to bring in the other type of well-being into the equation. And this eudaimonic happiness, the second one, in Tibetan known as yang dakpe dewa, or genuine happiness, comes from within, from the state of our mind, from the qualities of our mind, from the way our mind is currently configured and organized. So, how do we feel when we're left to our own devices without any stimulation whatsoever for, let's say, 15 minutes or 10 hours? I just recently watched a video about someone taking a long intercontinental flight, I think across the Atlantic. Well, that what would make it intercontinental. Yeah, I think from London to Los Angeles. And it's a very long flight, obviously. And so most people try to find ways to entertain themselves on flights like that, watching something, reading something, or just sleeping at least, so that the mind is never bored. But what if you were to choose to remain without any of those types of stimulation and just be with your mind kind of one to one in a way, even though you're in a plane full of people, but seemingly one to one because there's no books, no phones, you're not using the in-flight entertainment or anything like that. You are just there with your mind, left to your own devices, pun intended. So you're staying there for 10 hours, and how would you feel? So the person in question in that video did not feel quite well. They reported that they were seemingly losing their mind, kind of out of boredom and just the way the mind started to act up. And that's not an optimal situation from a Buddhist point of view, because ideally, if we were to create and maintain the systems that support eudaimonic well-being, we would actually be quite happy when left with our mind on its own, with no additional sources of stimulation, just spending hours with our mind, or minutes, or years. Uh, Practitioners who spend years in solitary retreat sometimes are very hedonically poor, in that they're just sitting there in their tiny retreat hut, not even looking outside the window that much. And there's not much to stimulate them. They have a couple of Dharma texts, maybe, they're those usually practice texts. On occasion, that would have one book to read, such as the biography of Milarepa, which is a very good EcoDharma source in a way, in this specific regard when it comes to eudaimonic well-being. But outside of that, no TV, no gadgets, no human company, no animal company really either. The animals are somewhere out there, but you're not actively hanging out with them. You're just doing your practice and you're resting in between sessions. But people spend years and sometimes decades in that position. Why? Why would they do that? There's not much hedonic happiness there. Well, because it helps them increase the eudaimonic happiness that they're feeling, and because they already do have a certain level of eudaimonic happiness present within, which is actually why, for some of us, it is not a good idea to go into those extended retreats, especially solitary retreats, until our practice has matured. One of my teachers who guides 3-year retreatants in Germany once pointed out that a lot of the people who try to do those longer retreats because they have romantic ideas about them crash and burn quite early, because their mind was not properly prepared. It did not possess enough eudaimonic well-being to be able to just get through the retreat successfully, even a few months of that retreat. So it is an incremental process, this cultivation of eudaimonic well-being. It's a gradual process where we start with simple things and then move on to more complex things. And eventually we start feeling this inner joy at all times. It's present deep within us, kind of like a glowing ember, and then a big bonfire, and then eventually that's the working hypothesis of Buddhism. Eventually, it becomes as bright and as powerful as a star or as the sun. And it becomes so powerful that even if stuff is thrown at us, hedonic stuff included, um, all the negative stuff just gets burnt away by the intensity of this eudaimonic glow. And yeah, we're just vibing and chilling and radiating goodness towards others because eudaimonic well-being comes also from what we give to others, from what we bring to the world, what we share with others. So radiating something towards others. And this is where the questions that we were able to potentially contemplate last week or throughout the week come into play just as a moment of self-reflection. So if you do want to share something in the chat related to them, that would be wonderful. If not, totally fine as well. These are primarily for our personal contemplation. So the first one is what types of Dharma or what types of methods for cultivating happiness and avoiding suffering do I already apply daily to support my well-being? Uh, so, there are many potential answers there. I know some people who are doing different types of meditation. Obviously, there are some people who are doing different types of physical practices, yoga, tai chi, and so forth, or any really type of movement that makes you feel like you're becoming more sane, more stable, more focused, and so forth. Just many, many things of that nature. Obviously, therapy of different kinds could also belong to this category, something that helps us stay focused and calm and clear and kind and helpful uh, through a dialogue between us and another person. And all of these are, in a way, dharmic techniques. We could also replace the word dharma here with the phrase, with the wording of inner hygiene or emotional hygiene. That's a term that His Holiness the Dalai Lama uses on occasion. Inner hygiene. What types of inner hygiene do I perform on a daily basis? And once again, many options there, but some of the kind of all-time favorites could include meditation and so forth. So here's a reply from the chat. I meditate daily, try to go out to nature from time to time when the weather is good, especially recently have started therapy. Yeah. So these are all wonderful things to have. And I would say that many of the people I know would have one of these or a combination of these. Also, just to mention that as an aside, other things that could be in that category are sometimes seen by our society as being more spiritual or religious in nature, and these are such things as prayer, uh, and spiritual practice of different kinds. People perform ceremonies that are seen as religious but have obviously a psychological dimension to them, or read literature that's related to spiritual and religious issues. These are also all dharmic kind of techniques or dharma tools that could be used. So yeah, some of these are some of the different things that we could be using when it comes to this first point. And the second question, that's really personal. You don't need to give us the time necessarily unless you want to. How much time do I allocate to the cultivation of genuine or inner well-being through personal and communal activities? So just how much time do I spend on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis cultivating something that could be considered this genuine well-being deep within? There's once again no correct or incorrect answer. Um, Yes, it would be fancy to say, oh, I spend half of my time doing that, or I spend 6 hours every day cultivating eudaimonic well-being. And that's wonderful if that's what's available to you. But in many cases, those numbers would only be really available to eudaimonic professionals, to professionals who are focused on this eudaimonic field. That is, professional yogis and yoginis. In Tibetan culture, you do have professional yogis and yoginis who are primarily focused on this inner cultivation, not just in the Tibetan community, but the Tibetan community is the one that I'm most familiar with in this regard. But equally, in other Buddhist cultures as well, in non-Buddhist cultures as well, you would have these professionals who spend their days cultivating inner well-being. So they would be able to say, oh, this many hours of practice per day, or if they're at a really advanced stage, they could say everything that I'm doing has been transformed into practice, meaning every activity has been imbued with this quality of eudaimonia and with the different techniques for its cultivation. But if we're not in these categories, we are probably looking at a few minutes of eudaimonic practice, and then at the so-called informal practice that we sprinkle throughout our day. So we have, let's say, our 20, 30 minutes of meditation, maybe done in multiple sessions, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And then we have these things that we're trying to do throughout the day. And there are many of those that we could be doing, just staying mindful or maintaining loving kindness or maintaining compassion or thinking deeply about everything that's happening to us in order to see the interdependence of it all. There are many different things that we could be doing. And as we expand our inner toolkit, we're getting more and more tools to add to this informal process and also to our formal meditations. Yeah, but we're still looking at relatively small numbers, and yet even those could be truly and vastly transformative. So it is healthy to have an aspiration. It is good to have an aspiration for doing more practice in the future. Let's say, hoping to see how eventually would be able to do, hours of practice, like the professional contemplatives. And it is also totally fine to, for now, be doing what we are doing, just increasing that slowly, slowly. And one thing that should be said about all of this is that the cultivation of eudaimonia, this deeper well-being, without which I think it is impossible to solve the environmental issues that we're facing together. This cultivation of eudaimonia is not completely random and unstructured, or at least it does not have to be random and unstructured, because we do have, once again, numbered lists, including those taught originally by the Buddha, that can guide us in this process of cultivation, offering structure and logic to it all. So the Buddha himself, in particular, offered this threefold or three-step system for cultivating genuine well-being. And the system guides us through the three stages that eventually bring us to greater and greater experiences of genuine joy, genuine sustainable joy, genuine sustainable well-being that we could label or that we could refer to as happiness or well-being. So these three steps are known as Shila, or ethical practice, and that's basically the practice for calibrating our ethical intelligence and then experiencing what's known as the joy of clear conscience. Then Samadhi, sometimes translated as concentration, but it's not just concentration in a very technical sense of that word. It's also about gathering and refining our mental energy into a coherent stream that's free from potential flaws and that flows organically towards things that are wholesome and good. And then prajna, discerning intelligence, or wisdom, sometimes it's called for simplicity, or yeah, wisdom is always a good translation for this, but jna or gya here refers to knowledge or knowing something, and pra is prefix that conveys the idea of intensity or precision. And so it's this precise intelligence that we're applying to reality when we're looking at reality. So in this case, we're cultivating what's sometimes referred to as cognitive intelligence combined with what's known as philosophical intelligence, let's say. So basically, we're using our wisdom to understand reality in a more realistic, once again, pun intended, way we're trying to see the reality more accurately with fewer cognitive biases. And through that, having arrived at that, we are experiencing a great degree of well-being. That's the hypothesis here. So with each step, as we're working on these three steps that support each other, we are experiencing greater and greater degrees of well-being. And then the questions that are relevant here. Can these three aspects be used within the context of our relationship with nature? Can they be practiced outside of that context? So do they really exist outside of our relationship with the rest of the natural world? Could we be practicing them validly if we're ignoring everything that's related to the natural world, saying, oh, I don't care about nature at all. It doesn't matter to me what happens to it all. I'm just going to move to Mars and flourish there, and to hell with all these people, to hell with this planet, to hell with these trees. I don't care. Could that be a valid way of practicing these things? Is it possible to practice that way and actually get the results? Yeah, we can pretend, because obviously pretending is possible for sure, but is it possible to actually get the results? So, two questions to consider, really. These are, once again, for our deep personal philosophical contemplation. But my working answer, kind of my current answer, is that no, not really. Um, we cannot practice outside of the context of our relationship with the natural world genuinely. And with regards to the first one, can these aspects be used within the context of our relationship with nature? I would say, well, that's the only, contextually, right now in this day and age, I think that's the only way to practice those. And for that reason, all of my primary Buddhist mentors, starting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and including such masters as Garchen Rinpoche, Chökynima Rinpoche, and many others, they have all, on multiple occasions, talked about EcoDharma related issues, weaving EcoDharma into their teachings so that their students would be aware of this dimension of reality with greater clarity. And what are we working with when we're cultivating inner well-being? This is an idea that comes from one of the earliest teachings of the Buddha himself. Uh, if you read one of our books, the True Peace Work, I think, there's an wonderful essay by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is both a preeminent translator of the Pali tradition and very important voice in engaged Buddhism. You would see an essay by Bhikkhu Bodhi where he talks about the three fires and the fire sutta, the discourse on fire, the fire discourse by the Buddha, as it relates to kind of everything that's wrong in our communal dimension right now and everything that's wrong with our relationship with nature, basically. So it all boils down to these three fires, as they're referred to, these three burning things deep within us that distort our vision of reality and make us crave for things that are not good for ourselves or for others. So, as it says here, one of the major forces, or some of the major forces, let's put it that way, taking us away from eudaimonic balance and sustainable hedonic well-being as well, or the main forces taking us from eudaimonic balance and sustainable hedonic well-being as well, is what the Buddha described as the three fires: uh, attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So many people would recognize these as the three poisons, and that's a valid name for them. They are poisoning us, and they're poisoning through us the rest of reality, or our interdependence of which we're all a part. So that is totally valid. But they're also referred to as the three fires because they have this burning quality to them. And just like fire tends to do, when they touch something, it gets turned into ash. They damage and destroy stuff. So just for clarity, let's revisit the definitions of these three. Attachment is a part of our mind that exaggerates. Once again, this is referring to the Buddhist understanding of attachment, not to the attachment as seen in psychology, where it's a different there's a different understanding. It's a different thing. Here we're talking about the Buddhist term attachment, and um, it refers to this part of our mind that exaggerates the deliciousness of an object, therefore craving to possess them. So attachment exaggerates the beauty of this um, SpongeBob aluminum bottle that I have, and it thinks, oh, it's absolutely divine, I must possess it, and then it wants to grab that. And that might be less of a problem when it comes to reusable aluminum SpongeBob bottles. You know, "Oh, okay, I can live with that, and then you use it for 50 years. That's possible. You know, that might be less of a problem when it comes to at least our interaction with each other. When it becomes much more of a problem when that attachment gets directed at, let's say, the idea of possessing $50 billion, no, $100 billion, no, the entirety of wealth that's available on this planet, or the entirety of land that's available on this planet, or the entirety of political influence that's available on this planet, or the entirety of popularity and worship that's available on this planet. Some people crave for those things. And we could all actually get there if we let our attachment run amok. If we um, are not mindful and wise enough to try to control it. It just gets wild, and then it starts grasping at more and more stuff. And then before we know it, we turn into this vampire-like figure that wants to possess an incredible amount of hedonic goods to the detriment of everyone else. Obviously, that's what's very largely happening in our world right now in particular, but even before that, before that, it was much more difficult to possess the incredible levels of wealth that are available to some people right now. So that's attachment. Aversion is the part of our mind that exaggerates the negative traits of something and therefore wants to destroy it, or at least to push it away. And uh, aversion, when it comes to our current, the kind of to the current fabric of our societies, and this is pretty universal. Aversion, in large ways, yes, it still arises naturally as it always did, just based on our personal preferences. We see someone we don't like, and we are upset with them. We don't like them. We start hating them eventually. That's happening as it always has. But on top of that, we're seeing a dynamic where people who are overrun by attachment and want to get incredibly rich and incredibly powerful artificially fan the flames of aversion because it gives them control over people. Because if you make a group of people hate someone else through, let's say, a very, very cleverly organized media campaign, while their attention is there hating on someone, you get to control them because their vision, they fall into this mode of tunnel vision. They're focused on hating someone. And while that's happening, well, you can grab their resources, you can take away their rights, you can do whatever you want in order to feed your attachment, getting more powerful and more rich and so forth. So that's the danger of this dynamic, specifically when it comes to the interplay of attachment and aversion in our times. Attachment is kind of the main one. Attachment and then greed that arises on top of attachment. These are the main things to look out for, I think, in the EcoDharma field. Aversion is a tool in the service of that in many cases. Yes, in many other contexts, aversion would be the primary one to look at. But when it comes to EcoDharma, it's greed and attachment that we're primarily looking at. But both of these stem from the foundational fire of ignorance or incorrect knowing, because the word ignorance can sound as if it's just about not knowing something. And while there is an element of just not knowing some things, the main point of this mental state is that it's an active misinterpretation of reality. That's how it's described and defined. It's an active misinterpretation of reality through which we see reality incorrectly. In particular, what we fail to see is interdependence. What we fail to see is the interdependent nature of our own selves and how we are just a part of this much larger, infinitely vast field of existence. Another thing that we're failing to see through ignorance is the nature of genuine happiness and well-being. We're failing to see that it is totally impossible to become truly happy through simply acquiring more hedonically. That's also a type of ignorance. And the only way to solve this problem is to, um, well, start undoing the different levels of ignorance that are present within us, personally, collectively, and globally. And then through that, we will hopefully be able to also undo the two derivative fires, the fire of attachment and the fire of aversion. To the degree that we're even able to see the three fires, we're already able to rise up above them. So if we're, for example, looking at our collective reality and the streams of information and everything that has to do with environmentalism, let's say, we're looking at it and we're seeing how ignorance is perpetuated in these ways and it's present with regards to these issues. And then attachment is present here very strongly. People are grasping at this stuff. They're trying to acquire that. And that's what's driving their greedy, mindless behavior. And then looking at aversion, well, here's why it's arising, and here how it is artificially fanned, and here's how it is coming up naturally. We're looking at all of it. We're just seeing that we're not yet even applying any specific tools to counteract that, but just through clear saying, we're kind of a little bit out of the matrix already, to a certain degree, not fully, but to a certain degree, there's already a weakening of the control that the three fires have over us, just through recognizing them, through knowing, oh, this is where we are failing collectively and where my personal systems of interpretation and understanding are failing me personally. So very interesting to contemplate these three. So if you do have the True Peace work digitally or obviously as an actual book, and you want to explore that essay by Bhikkhu Bodhi, that's a great one, a very good one. And that's based on the Buddha's fire sermon or fire discourse, where the Buddha talks about how these three fires are burning us and essentially all sentient beings, preventing us from being happy. So then, when it comes to the three aspects of eudaimonic well-being, the three steps for the cultivation of eudaimonic well-being, when it comes to Shila or ethical practice, which is sometimes said to boil down to just non-violence or non-harmfulness, when it comes to the natural world, we have such aspects of it as the ethics of nonviolence towards ourselves, towards other humans, towards other types of sentient beings, and towards the environment. So how do we practice all of these in a non-contradictory manner? Right? That's the challenge. But that's the challenge that we can totally rise up to and deal with. I'm following a number of educational environmentalist accounts on social media. And one thing that's really interesting is that sometimes these outlets would bring up a thing that we could easily change, really, without, well, any dramatic sacrifices. But that if we were to collectively, but first personally, change that, it would have major positive implications for the natural world. So small dietary changes, let's say, or small changes, relatively small, comparatively small changes in how we approach consumption. Not something large and dramatic, as in let's all start drinking water or something like that. Not something that would prevent us from receiving the foundational sustenance, but more things related to our personal preferences and tastes. And whenever that comes up, there's always a lot of people that say, well, you don't get it. I like this stuff, so I'm allowed to eat it or do it or whatever, to keep consuming that. So it's very interesting because people are saying that based on their wish to still honor themselves and their needs. So non-harmfulness towards ourselves in a way, even though we could go deeper into that and say, well, is consuming this stuff really good for you? But that's outside. Let's temporarily leave that outside of the equation and just say, yes, people want to feel happy personally. And for that reason, they say, well, I'm still going to be doing this or still going to be doing that. But then, is there a way for us to honor our own happiness while also honoring the happiness and safety for other humans, other types of sentient beings, and the environment or the planet? That's the bigger challenge, kind of a step above self-care. That's a large conversation in general, actually, when it comes to inner cultivation skills, mindfulness, Buddhism, positive psychology, all of these fields. We've spent the last decade talking about self-care, and now there is kind of a push, and that in Buddhism, that push was always there. That's kind of the foundational ethical system of Mahayana Buddhism, a push for transcending self-care and going into uh, the caring for all of us at the same time. Yes, it is important to take care of this body and this mind if we are to use them as a valuable tool, but never at the exclusion of everyone else. So it's or it should never be self-care that just privileges us and our tiny social circle over everyone else. At least that's something to consider. So then with samadhi, once we have figured out some foundational principles of Shila, then with samadhi, with these practices for cultivating mental composure, there are many practices that bring us closer to the natural world. There are practices that would not necessarily have much to do with the natural world, but many are directly connected to it. And we work with them, and then through that we do not only receive the benefits of having stronger concentration and so forth. These practices bring us closer to a wholesome or a holistic vision of reality. So as it says here, focusing our awareness on that which is natural, such as the breath or the elements, or even simply letting go in naturalness. So with the elements, there were historically these practices for focusing on the fire element, the water element, and so forth. They're still sometimes taught in the Theravada tradition, and they were also present in the Sanskrit tradition, even though I think there they fell into disuse. But all the traditions still very much use the practice of focusing on the breath, and that's an aspect of the natural world. I think when working with the breath, or if you have breath-related issues such as asthma, you become very immediately aware, or allergies, you become very powerfully aware of the fact of how important it is for us to have clean air, breathable air. That becomes very obvious to you. And that can serve as a powerful source of motivation for actually doing something about it and making sure that we're all aware of the fact, which largely humanity is currently not very focused on that, very sadly. You know, very interesting. Or if you were to focus on the other elements, I think a similar understanding would arise with regards to them. So recognizing how our freshwater resources are dwindling. We have less and less and less fresh water, and incredible amounts of it go into sustaining the AI, the generative AI systems, where it gets evaporated and then eventually falls back into the sea, but the fresh water is not replenished. So we're kind of actively destroying our freshwater reserves in order to create funny pictures on our phones. So very interesting to consider that as well. But even if we're not actively focused on, let's say, water, earth, and so forth, or any of the five elements, Just the practice of letting go of naturalness, the practice of the three pills, which is in itself also a concentration technique, amongst other things. Even that practice, especially if we do it and then we allow ourselves to feel the connection to the natural world, can strengthen our ecological intelligence, our awareness of the role we're playing in these environmental processes. And then with Prajna, we're actually starting to tackle that more directly because there are practices that allow us to look deeply into the interdependent network of existence, um, considering, let's say, how am I connected to the rest of the natural world? How am I a system? How are we all living in a system? How are our communities a system? And how can these systems function in a more positive, more wholesome, more beneficial way? So lots of things. This is not an exhaustive list in any way whatsoever, but just a short list with some examples of how Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna or Pragya could be used to strengthen our ecological intelligence. And this is where eventually, slowly, we arrive at this more holistic vision of physical and mental well-being. There are traditional versions of that. And I think there are ways of constructing a relatively quote unquote modern one, even though just being modern is not in itself a virtue necessarily, but one that would incorporate the modern scientific discoveries and insights into it. Well, as it says here, exemplified by the medical and healing traditions of India and China and Tibet, this holistic approach interprets our health, both physical and mental, as a state of balance between the five elements and the three humors of wind, bile, and phlegm. These are kind of the three foundational building blocks of our body, and they're still explored as one of the most important things in the traditional systems of medicine, at least in South Asia and to a certain degree also in East Asia. And for Tibetan medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, the wind, bile, flame play a major role in figuring out why are we sick and how to get healthy. This is actually something that's described in the Buddhist sutras as well, such as the Golden Light Sutra, which many people might know. It's actually a major EcoDharma source in its own, on its own. So because it has lots of wonderful EcoDharma stuff happening in it. So amongst other things, there's a chapter in the Golden Light Sutra that talks about how Buddha, in one of his previous lifetimes before he was a Buddha, became a successful, accomplished doctor. And that doctor, amongst other things, was healing beings by helping them balance their three humors, wind, bile, and phlegm. And then actually it includes a little instruction on how to work with these in different seasons, how to prescribe this type of medicine for this type of imbalance at this specific season, where there is a more likelihood that something would flare up. So very interesting. But then teachings for rebalancing these factors include both practical lifestyle recommendations and meditation techniques. At the root of them is the recognition of how important natural balance is recognizing how important natural balance is. So practical lifestyle recommendations and meditation techniques. And this is kind of what we're dealing with in EcoDharma as well. Making actual practical changes in how we interact with the world and using our mind, the laboratory of our mind, to continue cultivating the realistic and kind ways of viewing reality. So we need both. It is valid for someone to say, I think, well, with your EcoDharma, you're meditating there. Are you actually doing something for the environment? That's a valid question to ask. And at the same time, it's also valid to ask, well, is it likely that people would be shifting their behavior, changing their behavior in large ways, unless there's a shift in the way they view reality? Is it likely for a huge number of people to completely change their behavior unless there's an understanding that lies at the root of that? That's a valid question to explore. So ideally, we would have both. Just like with, let's say, Tibetan medicine, we would have both. we would be invited to take these pills and make these changes in our diet, and also to meditate to change our mind, because our mind is at the root of it all. So the same thing with EcoDharma. And then some of the shifts that we can perform when it comes to our inner work, our inner lab, the lab of our mind, where we want to perform these transformative kind of when we want where we want to find these transformations, is to cultivate these three qualities. Yes, sensitivity, which would include kind of both the understanding of interdependence and a certain emotional openness to it, which includes empathy and such things. And just being open to seeing stuff, keeping our eyes open so that we can see with greater clarity, and a sense of sacredness. And that's a very interesting one, because I think that's the one that collectively, at least in most countries affected by capitalism, or kind of global consumption models, that's the one that we are either losing very rapidly or have lost altogether, at least when it comes to the natural world. Some people still maintain a sense of sacredness towards the transcendental. They think, oh, and feel, oh, God, let's say, is somewhere out there on the other side of reality, looking over us, and maybe we can communicate with them, and through some religious practices in a church, in a temple, in a mosque, and so forth. But here, nothing is sacred per se. It's just all dust, it's just all this gross matter, and there's nothing sacred in it, which is one way of viewing reality. But the traditional systems were not looking at it like this at all. This material reality in many traditions was in its own seen as a magical and sacred display of something deeper. So, how do we regain that, rebuild that, reconstruct that, so that our relationship with nature is more healthy? So, as it says here on the slide, finding a balanced way to respond to our environment and to our own composing factors, the stuff that we are made of, in order to bring out a natural sense of well-being. One thing that we're using here is the mental factor of appreciation. And that allows us to deepen that contact and sense of sacredness in the same way that we also would towards our spiritual lineage. So appreciation is the same mental factor that we're using in our three lineages meditation. When we think of the land lineage, the spiritual lineage, the ancestral lineage, we, amongst other things, are trying to appreciate them for what they are. Appreciate them and say, yes, despite some potential flaws here and there, or shortcomings here and there, you still have these beautiful qualities present in you. And that's wonderful. So let that inspiration flow into my heart. So recognizing the qualities and appreciating them, that's what the appreciation mental function does. And that's a very important part of Buddhist practice, at least especially in the Mahayana, and especially even more so in the Vajrayana register of Mahayana teachings. So strengthening this mental factor and using it appropriately when it comes to things that are actually valuable and beautiful and true, like the natural world, that's a wonderful way of using our, contemplative practice. And another thing that we can accomplish through even doing such practices is the one that we've been doing until now, the practice of settling in the three pills and looking out at the natural world, allow us to shift our vision. So as it says here, something that we can accomplish is learning to see our body and mind as fields of energy, which includes seeing the five elements in the body, or as field of interconnectedness and interbreeding. So instead of seeing our body as just one fixed thing that is good or ugly, young or old, seeing all of these dualities that we think are inherently present in the body. Instead of seeing it that way, we actually start to we start to see it as a dynamic, constantly evolving system full of vibrant energy. And yes, some developments in that system might not necessarily be to our liking. Maybe we would prefer to be, you know, always 25, always 26, always 28, as opposed to some other age. But what to do? It is a field that evolves, and there are laws to that evolution. But even though it is evolving, it's still fairly flexible at least with regards to how we can perceive it and use it. Some things start becoming more limited for us, but there's still a lot of good stuff that we can do with our body at any point. So then seeing how can I maintain the balance of these systems with our body and then with the rest of the systems as we're looking outside. And that is something that brings us to the communal and global planes of EcoDharma thinking. So the main practice that I would say we could put into the first category of soothing with regards to our personal and individual selves is this practice of stillness, silence, and spaciousness. We could add a dozen more practices to this category, actually, probably hundreds of practices. But the one that I would say is quintessential, very all-encompassing, very good for playing with this is the practice of the three pills. So I very much recommend that. I do recommend the book that I mentioned, The True Source of Healing, if you feel like you are in need of some inner rebuilding, some healing, some inner nourishment. Yeah, and if not, just doing this practice will be a learning curve of its own, will be a process of full of wonderful discoveries potentially and wonderful shifts, positive shifts, leading to greater degrees of well-being. Why this practice is good for everyone if we're doing it? Because through this practice, we'll learn how to deal with the three fires within us. When we are under the influence of the fire of attachment, when we are under the influence of the fire of aversion, and when we are under the influence of the fire of ignorance as well, resting deeply in stillness, silence, and spaciousness counteracts their influence. If everyone, when they were starting to feel really greedy or really hateful, if everyone was able to just rest in the three pills, well, we would have a very, very different world that we're living in, with way fewer problems stemming out of greed and hatred. And equally, ignorance, even though this is not a practice that actively invites us to investigate the nature of reality, still, indirectly, there's a shift because a natural type of insight can slowly develop from within, especially as we're resting in spaciousness. So we can gradually progress towards that goal through just applying this practice on its own. But we're coming now to the communal level. And before that, when it comes to resting with the three pills in a natural environment, a quote from Karen Armstrong and her book Sacred Nature, which I also very much recommend, especially when it comes to understanding, once again, the sacred nature of nature, for lack of better words, the sacred character of the natural world, shifting our perception back into what it used to be, really. What Karen Armstrong does as a historian of religion in that book is that she unpacks the different views that humanity came up with, the different religious traditions. She goes very deeply into Taoism, but beyond that, Islam and a few other traditions. And she shows how, at least initially, all of them perceive nature as something truly wonderful and sacred. And it's only much later that we started seeing it as something to be exploited. So here she says, we can begin by taking simple steps, perhaps sitting in a garden or a park for 10 minutes a day without headphones or a mobile phone, simply registering the sights and sounds of nature. Instead of taking photographs of our surroundings, we should look at the birds, flowers, clouds, and trees and let them impress themselves on our minds. In another of his poems, Wordsworth speaks of the wise passiveness that should inform our dealings with nature. He's arguing with somebody who has his nose in a book all the time, blocking out all the sights and sounds of the natural world. Just hard to imagine what he would have thought of our technology today, right? As in, well, fewer and fewer people are reading books. So we're mostly focused on our gadgets right now, to the exclusion of both books and the natural world. So, in this regard, just arriving at a place that has some nature to it, resting in the three pills for a few moments or for a few minutes, and then just opening our sense doors to what's around us and absorbing that for a little while. or for a long time, if that's available to us. That is something that on its own, even before we do any sort of philosophical contemplation, can strengthen our appreciation of the natural world. And it can also actually bring us the experience of one of the most wonderful qualities that are currently being actively studied, the quality of awe, which is the sense of wonder that we experience, the transformative, expanding sense of wonder that we experience when we're faced with something larger than ourselves. So there's a lot of already good research on the benefits of awe. Some of it done by Dacher Keltner, who was the scientific advisor for Inside Out and Inside Out 2. So outside of his work with emotions in general and Disney and teaching in Berkeley, he's done a lot of wonderful work with awe. And it seems that awe has a very important role to play in our well-being and in our growth, which is why it's important for children in particular, and adults as well, obviously. But for children, it's really important. And connecting to the natural world is one of the most easy ways to experience awe because the natural world is larger than just the tiny old me. And when faced with that and looking at it directly, I can experience awe more powerfully. So, and this is where we switch to the communal level, starting with this little quote from Tsongkhapa, one of the greatest sages in Tibetan Buddhist history. Of all Buddha's deeds, his words were the greatest, and there were words of dependent arising. Let the wise therefore remember him this way. So as we're making this transition from personal to collective and then eventually global, we're starting to look at dependent arising and interdependence, we could say, and not simply arising as in what leads to what, but also horizontal interdependence of how do we exist with relation to each other within a large, constantly evolving system. And so this on the communal plane, the key word that I would use, and that's just my way of labeling it, you can use it or discard it, is I would say that our main job here is to see. So on the personal level, with everything that's going on within us, we're seeing the three fires burning within us. We're seeing that there's a lack of hedonic well-being or eudaimonic well-being. Well, soothing our suffering, calming it all down, bringing it closer to the qualities of calmness first, and then clarity, kindness, and helpfulness would emerge from that. Right? That's why if I were to choose one word for the personal level of EcoDharma, I would say it's soothing. But on the communal level, it's not just about going around and soothing each other constantly, even though sometimes that's appropriate. Before we can actually soothe anyone on the outside, anyone other than ourselves, we need to actually see them. We need to see them hope. We need to see their needs. We need to see their experiences. We need to listen to them. We need to hear what they have to say, and then soothing can happen. Otherwise, if seeing is missing, we're just running around offering advice that no one asked for, really, or trying to offer solutions that are not even relevant to the situation because we have not seen the situation itself first. So this is where seeing comes into play, kind of first empathy and then things that stem from that empathy. So in terms of understanding our communities, a wonderful tool that I've been taught when I was doing academic studies, even though I dropped out of my PhD program eventually because I became a Buddhist monk and then um, I'm no longer a monk either, so failed at everything in life. But one thing that I did inherit from my academic learning was this very helpful threefold systems analysis model, in which when we're looking at any system, whether that's our family or the large system of a country, let's say, we're looking at its components or the elements of which it is built. Within a family, those would be the individuals, me and these two aunts, and then these 17 cousins, yada, yada, yada. So these are the components. Then the second element is properties. So all of these people that are present in this community, what are their properties? How are they? What are their qualities? What habits do they have? What talents do they have? Who are they as an individual? That's something that we would use for individuals. If the components that we identified are inanimate, that we would equally analyze the properties of those inanimate objects. And the last thing to look at is the relationship. So what's the dynamic between this person and that person, or between these five people together, or between everyone? So we can look at the different types of relationships that exist there. And this is just one example of kind of an orderly way of the multiple orderly ways of looking at systems that are interdependent. We don't have to use something like this that has a list, even though that's sometimes helpful for just developing this muscle of systems thinking. We could just look at a situation or a problem and try to think, well, what are the multiple factors at play here? What are the multiple causes and conditions that are at play here? If we're looking at the origin of a specific problem, we could look at it and think, well, what are the factors that are contributing to me having this problem? And what are some of the positive factors that I could introduce to change the dynamic? That's another thing we could do. Overall, all of these tools are just there to help us expand our vision and go beyond our limited, self-centered, self-focused, self-preoccupied vision of reality, where we only see things that are about us or that affect us. So it's only about me or things that affect me. No, going beyond that, pushing the walls away to see more people, more beings actually, more types of relationships between beings. And on the basis of that, to then develop the wonderful qualities of love and compassion. Um, yeah. So when it comes to EcoDharma, for example, two questions and the communal level of it, two things that we can ask ourselves, and this is for journaling between this class and the next one, if you wish to, are these two. What beneficial qualities are already strongly present within my communities and which can still be strengthened? And this is just not just about wonderful qualities in general. It's like, oh, there's a lot of kindness in my community. That's valid, but we can also ask this question specifically with regards to EcoDharma. What are some of the things that are already present within my community and its relationship with regards to its relationship with the rest of the natural world and its stewardship of the natural world, custodianship of the natural world, and what can still be strengthened? And then a practical question stemming from that: how can I affect the flow of these positive qualities in different ways? What can I do? What can I do to contribute to these positive types of dynamic where slowly, slowly, there would be a cultural transformation for my family or for this entire local community or for this entire country? What are the things that can keep throwing at people skillfully so that slowly, slowly there's incremental change? That's something to explore, to play with, to consider. So we can consider these points with regards to the individual communities that we personally belong to. And all of us, for all of us, we would have very different answers because we are probably finding ourselves in very different communities. We all belong to this global community called humanity right now, but in terms of our um, language groups, local environments, our professional fields, and so forth, there would be a lot of uniqueness to what each one of us can consider. But that's kind of the good thing here. In order to perform this environmentalism related cultural shift, we do need multiple agents of change all across the globe in every community possible. And those agents of change start radiating these positive kind of streams of information and these qualities and these new types of dynamic, so that slowly, slowly there's a positive shift for all of us. Um, One thing to consider on this communal level is, of course, the fact that there are many sentient beings. It's not just us, and they're not even just humans. Um, so one thing that we could play with to the degree that's available to us, and there's No one's saying you should do it this way and not that way, or vice versa. One way to play with it is to consider that, yes, indeed, there are multiple sentient beings, and I can at least consider these specific types. As it says here in the slide, though, Mahayana Buddhism, though not only Mahayana Buddhism, because this is true of many, many traditions across the world, expands our vision and invites us to consider multiple types of beings. Multiple types of beings meaning not simply humans and animals. In the Tibetan cultural tradition, that includes multiple invisible beings whose existence interpenetrates the domain of our own experience. Because obviously, the for Buddhist yogis and yoginis, they have established that there are some beings that are not visible with our human eye, but still do exist. So different types of spirits and so forth. And that's a common theme for many spiritual traditions across the world. That being said, that's one thing that we could definitely consider and play with. But outside of that, we can also consider the miniature beings that are not visible with our eye because we don't have a microscope. If we were to use a microscope, we would see those miniature beings. Buddhism talks of those as well, saying that our bodies are inhabited by 27 million types of those invisible beings, and all of those are sentient beings. They are also beings with their own consciousness, temporarily reborn as these teeny tiny um, kind of friends and foes that abide within our body, are either in a parasitic relationship or a symbiotic relationship. So uh, that's another type of being, another large category of beings that exists. And then thinking of all the different types of beings that have to do their job in order for our environment to function, even for 1 year. The pollinators, like bees and many, many others, and every type of being that's involved in composting or in stuff being processed in the soil so that the soil is still suitable for plants to grow in. Considering all these multiple types of interconnectedness, even on 1 square mile, um, in terms of the locale of it, the kind of the space of it, the spatial dimension of it, considering all these types of beings, and then learning in our practices of loving kindness and compassion to extend loving kindness and compassion to all these beings and not just to humans. Not just to humans, which is how these practices of loving kindness are very often taught when they're taught in the insight meditation movement in the West. Very often, people are offered all these traditional steps for going through the cultivation of loving kindness and, yes, friends, strangers, enemies, and so forth. That's all coming straight out of Buddhaghosa's texts. Very important type of training. But then eventually, we need or we are invited to also extend that to all beings, including non-human beings. And for some of us, actually, our major blind spot is with regards to non-human beings because we simply refuse to acknowledge that what happens to them matters. Even though we know that if the bees go extinct, there's a high probability of all of us going extinct because of that. Well, not just bees, but pollinators in general. And they are very, very strongly endangered. So how do we offer loving kindness to them? Then transforms into actual protective action, where we make sure that, yes, we do everything possible to make sure that pollinators still do exist, for the common well-being of all the beings on this planet. So that's something to play with. And this is where we start looking at the practices of loving kindness and compassion. Loving kindness is a wish for beings to be happy and to possess the causes of happiness. Compassion is the wish for beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So very simple practices. There's lots of wonderful materials on them, lots of guidance on them. However, with regards to EcoDharma, what we might want to do is to start expanding them in multiple directions. So I like to think of it in multiple ways. One of them is horizontal expansion, and that's the one we are quite used to, except we're usually limited to humans. So horizontal expansion means extending loving kindness to other beings that are alive right now. Not just me, but my friend Steve, not just my friend Steve, but also, let's say, his wife, and not just her. And then that we go through all these figures or groups of beings, and eventually we extend loving kindness to all sentient beings. So that's kind of horizontal in terms of all of us being alive right now. That's one way of doing it. And the one shift that we could, the one tiny adjustments that tiny adjustment, sorry, that we could bring in here is making sure that we're extending loving kindness to also non-human species as well. And then another way of practicing loving kindness, which I think is very valuable in the EcoDharma context, is kind of vertical or temporal. So not just wishing happiness and the causes of happiness for all the beings that are alive right now, but also extending that into the future generations. They do not actively exist as of yet. They exist as a potentiality right now. But may they be happy and have the causes of happiness. Doing that over extended periods of time would obviously shift our thinking and perhaps develop a stronger sense of responsibility, environmental responsibility included, with regards to the future generations and what they are likely to inherit when it comes to this planet. So that's another way to practice loving kindness that's important, I think, in terms of EcoDharma, and that's something that I would play with. So let's, as we're arriving kind of to the conclusion of today's class, now that we're shifting to this communal aspect where we're trying to see and then we're trying to offer loving kindness and compassion. Let's do a little bit of that as a meditation. So we'll first do a horizontal practice of loving kindness, and then kind of this temporarily vertical one. And then we'll conclude with that to spend a week playing with these ideas in any way we see fit. So let's stretch if we feel like stretching, move around if we feel like moving around, drink some water, and then eventually arrive at a comfortable stationary position. So, assuming a comfortable stationary position and bringing our awareness to our body to first establish a foundation of stability and relaxation. Performing an abbreviated body scan by exploring the sensations in our feet, our legs in general, our hands and fingers, our shoulders, and our face. Then revisiting our highest aspirations for our contemplative practice in general, for this meditation in particular, for our exploration of EcoDharma. What are the highest goals that we would like to realize? And then for the main part of this practice, connecting to the quality of loving kindness deep within us, our foundational ability to wish for the happiness and well-being of different sentient beings, starting with ourselves. First, focusing on ourselves as a being present here, experiencing stuff moment by moment. May I be happy and have the causes of happiness. Offering this wish to ourselves, to our body and mind, now and in the future. May I be happy and have the causes of happiness. And then extending this wish to a few beings around us, let's say all the beings in the same building, or if we're outside, within the radius of 2 meters. Large beings like ourselves, small beings like the ones abiding within our own body, beings underground, beings in the air, ants, insects of different kinds, birds, bees. May we be happy and have the causes of happiness. Keeping our awareness on this entire field with all of the beings present in it, but also reminding ourselves that there are many different types of beings in this field. And we can all slowly, slowly progress towards greater happiness and well being. And even establish an equilibrium. There can be a balance in our relationships with each other, pervaded by a sense of respect for the sacredness of life. Then extending that a bit further, let's say to the entire region that we're in. For some of us, that's a city, for some, a town, a village, or a region of different kind. Thinking of the numerous beings of different kinds within that locale. May we all be happy and have the causes of happiness. And then opening it up even more, in this case, to all sentient beings, or if we wish to use that for now, to all beings on this specific planet. So many different kinds of beings, visible and not visible with a bare eye, humans and animals of so many different kinds, and other categories of beings as well. May we all be happy and have the causes of happiness. And then for a little while, we'll do a different kind of loving kindness practice. First, offering loving kindness to all the beings who are alive right now, our contemporaries. And of course, this list also includes ourselves. So we could say, may we be happy and have the causes of happiness, focusing on that. For a little while, we can even offer loving kindness to the beings who were, to those who lived in the past. Certainly, from the Buddhist point of view, those beings still exist, just in other forms. The continuity of their minds will never cease, so they're definitely somewhere right now. But also just offering this idea that even for those who lived in the past, we do want happiness and well-being. Because the happier they are, the more likely they are to contribute to something that's good. So if we wish for a little while, we can extend the same attitude towards beings that existed in the past, including all the historical figures throughout history. Wouldn't it be lovely if their minds as well could be pervaded by the qualities of eudaimonic well-being, by wisdom, by compassion? So may you be happy and have the causes of happiness. And then thinking of those who are yet to come, the future generations. So many different kinds of sentient beings once again, but in particular, those of them that will come to be alive in the future. May you be happy and have the causes of happiness. As we arrive at the end of the practice, we can add an element that comes from the Mahayana style of doing loving kindness meditations. And that is also wishing, may I contribute to this happiness and well-being directly. So we're not simply wishing for beings to be happy and have the causes of happiness. We're also programming the energy of our body, speech, and mind to be a contributing factor in the happiness and well-being for all who live. And with that, we arrive at the conclusion. We dedicate the energy of our practice to our highest aspirations. We come back to our body, and then we slowly introduce a tiny bit of movement to the body, reactivating our system and slowly concluding the practice. Thank you. So we'll conclude here for today. The idea is that on the basis of soothing our inner systems through, for example, applying the practice of the three pills, we start looking outside at our communities and at the beings within those communities. And we start seeing that these beings, just like us, want to be happy, and that these beings are not only each one of these beings is a system, but also these beings exist in interrelationships with each other. And we can look at the communities and the systems to which they belong to understand the dynamics with greater clarity. And once we have seen the beings and their communities and our own relationship with them and so forth, we can then, on the basis of seeing, start offering benevolence in the form of loving kindness, in the form of compassion, in the form of other pro-social qualities such as empathetic joy and equanimity and so forth. And slowly, with that, we can also develop this aspiration that comes from the Mahayana tradition, but is not obviously limited to it. And that is a wish to be a contributing factor to everyone's well-being. May the energy of my body, speech, and mind serve the well-being for all who live, obviously including non-human species, obviously including the Earth itself with all of its complex systems. So that's something to play with on a practical level. And if we combine that with a little bit of journaling and a little bit of reading, and just with paying close attention to the natural world around us so that we can reestablish a sense of sacredness, I think even in 1 week we can see certain shifts in how we perceive all of this stuff, we perceive these topics, and we perceive the planet around us. So, wishing you all a very beautiful week of practice, hopefully. If you find something that resonates, please use just that. And we will reconvene next week for our final class in this 3-part course um, to see how, from the personal and the communal, we can move on to the global, hopefully making a positive contribution, even if to us it seems like something impossible right now. So, wishing you lots of joy in your practice and see you all next week. Thank you, Zoe, for hosting us today. And yeah, hoping that everyone is really well. Bye bye.